Hello and welcome to the Mirror Effect. My name is John and I'm one of your hosts. And today we have Sam White on the show, and he talks about living two separate lives and how unhealthy it was for him. His story is very, very, very inspirational, and we're really, really appreciative that he came on. Also, a couple of things I want to know. Just one announcement about this specific show. Episode 10 will be our last episode of this specific season. Then we'll be taking a month off of posting, and we'll be back in early August. So just so you know, episode 10 will be the last of the season, and I will explain that more. Also, follow us on Instagram at the Mirror Effect Podcast. Anyways, we're going to jump right in. Here's Sam. Anyways, so let's basically, we were talking about at the very beginning about how I don't know much of your story, but I'm like really, and you're also avoiding sickness at your own home, correct?
Yes, so we're trying not to be sick here.
Yeah, I love it. And so welcome to the Mirror Effect. My name is John. We're going to jump right in, only because we recorded this once before and I didn't get it on recording, so we're jumping right in.
Only like 5 minutes of it, though.
Yeah, my name is John Albright, and welcome to the Mirror Effect. I am your only host today. Zach is out today because he hates us and everything that is magical and good in the world. So if you know Zach, please give him a shaming message on Facebook or Instagram, or I don't think he's on Twitter, but if you can find him on Twitter, give him a shaming message on Twitter. I'm just kidding. We love Zach, but he's out today. He's sick, not feeling well, and rip to him. Today we have Sam White. Whoa, Sam, but you're basically Sean White, right? I mean, come on, like you're that cool though.
Shoot, dude.
Sam White is on the show today. A pitiful laugh, a pitiful clap, because Zach's not here and he usually backs me up on that. How are you doing today, Sam?
I'm doing good. We're trying to, like you said, we're trying to avoid getting sick here at the manor, we call it. And so far, I think I'm going to get sick.
Who's gotten sick, though? Because I know you live with Michael, but I don't know anybody else.
So I live with Michael and Kat Penning, and they both got sick. She went down a lot harder than he did.
Yeah.
And then I live with Anthony Cirilli. I actually promised I was going to shout him out, so this is perfect.
Good. Adam.
So Anthony Cirilli, I always say his name wrong.
Okay.
It's actually Anthony Surreal. He's going to kill me.
Surreal? That's a big difference.
Yeah, it's surreal. And then, so he's not sick yet. I am sick.
You are getting there, it sounds like.
So we'll see.
I hope you beat it, man. It's not fun to be sick.
I don't want to RIP, dude.
Dude, rip for real, dude.
I'm not ready to rip.
Honestly, that is so real. What's going on with you, Sam? Tell me a little bit about yourself, because most people that listen to this might not know who you are.
Yeah.
So give me the version of what is going on in Sam's life today.
All right, so I'm 28, gonna be 29 actually at the end of the month.
Ooh.
And so I started leading worship. That's kind of my MO. So I started leading worship when I was 16. I've been doing music. I've been playing drums since I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
So I've been doing worship on and off for the last, 11, 12 years, which has been a great honor. Spent some time in many, many different churches. Currently, I'm playing guitar, leading worship, and playing drums at my church, which is Journey Community Church in La Mesa.
Big one. You guys just celebrated an anniversary,
right?
25
25 years.
That's a long time for a church.
Which is cool, which was kind of funny because Michael and I were actually at a new church in Vista, California, Anthem Church. And it was just, we thought it was so ironic. Like, here we are, the official 25th anniversary of Journey, and Journey is serving another church by giving him a worship team, which was really cool. I thought was really a cool thing. We had a drummer from Journey, and then Michael and I, who are two of the worship leaders at Journey, which we thought was only appropriate. So
yeah, this seems like the Journey way. It's been a while. I know a lot of people from Journey. I know Ben Toth, who maybe you know, and he's been on the podcast. And my brother Bobby goes to Journey.
I love Bobby. Love Bobby.
Yeah,
Bobby, if you're listening to this, I love you.
He's probably listening. He's a pretty avid fan. Yeah,
love Bobby.
We had him on 2 weeks ago, and that was quite an experience.
So good.
He's an experience, to say the least.
Yes.
he goes to Journey, and and then Amber Blank. I don't know if she goes to Journey, but she knows people from Journey.
She's in and out of Journey. She's awesome. I love Amber.
Her
God,
story
Amber is so amazing.
is insane, and so it's kind of turning into the Journey podcast here.
I know.
I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves. But so yeah, we've been worshiping in the worship ministry for so long. It sounds like you definitely gave us your creds, I believe in, and I follow you on Instagram, which is how we connected. Which on your Instagram, you always post these cool videos.
Dude,
of you
at
shredding
Samuel
it.
Donovan White, come
Yeah.
follow me.
I'm glad you already shouted it out. At the end, we usually give it out, but I'm glad you're doing it now.
Shoot. Okay.
No. It was great. It was perfect. I wouldn't change it. And so, yeah, I mean, I know, like, based off your Instagram, and sometimes that can be people can kind of be whoever they want on Instagram, but you're very genuine, and you are a really good musician from what I've seen on Instagram. And so, I mean, that's awesome. And this ties into your story because sounds like today we're going to be talking a little bit about ministry and you kind of going in and out of that and what that looks like. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So here's the deal. As you know, and if you're listening, you know as well, the Mirror Effect, we always try and kind of talk about a story or a journey you've been through. And yours is very much tied to ministry, which I'm excited about because I'm very much tied to my own ministry at my own church. And I'm interested to see if some of our feelings are the same because I've been having some interesting feelings about ministry lately as well.
Yeah.
So start at the beginning. I don't know where that is for you, but start at the beginning and let's kind of move our way through.
Okay, so I guess it all kind of starts. So when I was about 15, 16 years old, I met a guy named Greg, and he was awesome. Mm-hmm. He was like the first like kind of rock star Christian that I ever wanted to like. In Scripture, it talks about like Paul is like follow me as I follow Christ.
Yeah.
Well, Greg was kind of my first like, oh dude, I want to be just like this guy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I want to talk about is I've had several figures in my life over the years that I've literally tried to copy. Like I've literally tried to talk like them, be like them.
Interesting.
Like literally everything. Like tried to meet girls that were similar to their wives.
Wow.
It's super trippy.
Yeah.
So he was kind of the first guy that like I really felt like I wanted to emulate. I think a lot of that had to do with like I had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
I was 16. I was at a Christian school, and I all I knew is that I was good at music. That's all I really knew. And I remember one Sunday being like, man, it would be cool to play drums on the worship team.
Yeah.
And he was kind of a spur of the moment kind of guy. So he kind of walked up to me and was like, it was like middle of the service. He was like, hey, I talked to our worship pastor before, and you're actually going to play drums on the last song.
Wow.
And I was like,
not knowing anything.
Yeah. I was like,
beforehand.
I don't what? And so
it can kind of be the best approach when you're nervous about something.
Dude.
It's just jumping in.
Yeah, and so I did it, and it went really well. And afterwards, our worship.
What
pastor,
song was it? Can I ask?
I don't remember.
Oh, you don't remember?
It was. It was a small. So I can tell you this. It was a small 200 member Southern Baptist church.
Oh, love
so
those.
It was something like.
Love those. It's one of those old hymns. I'm sure.
And it was like 2006.
Okay.
So it was probably like, I don't know, something in a flat key and led with a piano. There was no guitars. I think we maybe had a bass player. We had like 4 singers.
I love that.
All singing the melody.
Yeah. No harmonies. Come on. Harmonies is from work from the devil, okay?
Dude. And so I ended up starting to play, and it was awesome. And pretty soon into that, he had his band come in and lead worship. And a guy by the name of Ken... and he was awesome. He was their lead guy. And, and he ended up prophesying over me and speaking words over me, and where he said, like, I just see you going into ministry and just affecting, hundreds and hundreds of people. I think he used, I don't remember if he used hundreds or thousands, but
isn't that crazy?
Just a lot of people.
That can just be when somebody like speaks over you on that. Yeah. Like, you hear it and it sounds like, okay, that's kind of cheesy, Like, but when it's happening to you, like. It's insane. You feel like you're really kind of receiving something from somebody, even though it's just words. Yeah,
and it was really crazy. I remember going home and really audibly almost kind of hearing God say, I want you to lead worship.
Yeah.
Or I think at that time I'd heard him say, I wanted you to go into ministry. And I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And, I got saved in quotation marks when I was 7. didn't really know what that meant. And it really wasn't until my sophomore year that I started to surround myself with guys who were like, hey, you want to know what this whole Jesus thing was about? And I'm like, sure, it looks cool, and you guys have a lot of friends. So,
I know it's like a pull when you're young and you see like youth groups and stuff. You're like, I just love to hang out with them. I don't know what they're hanging out for, but just to be a part of a community. You know?
Yeah, and so like I said, I was at a Christian school. Ended up being the worship leader there my senior year, following after a really great worship leader named Chris and John, and they were really great worship leaders. And I actually still talk to Chris to this day.
Oh, wow.
And so after that, I graduated and was just kind of doing this internship at the church. Mm-hmm. Again, it was a really small church. I really quickly started to find myself getting into trouble. Like I said, it was a smaller church. Towards the end of the year of my senior year, Greg asked me to be the worship leader for his church plant. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I did it. I made it. At 18 years old, I'm going to be a worship pastor.
It's a big deal.
Having absolutely no idea what the word pastor meant.
Yeah.
And we started getting rolling with prayer meetings, and they were going really well. And then all of a sudden, I think 5 or 6 months after I graduated high school, I had kind of, thrown, how like when you're like, okay, well, this is something I'm going to do. And I had sort of thrown my eggs into this basket of like, okay, well, I'm going to be a worship pastor. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
6 months into it, they go to this A29 boot camp, and he comes back and sits me down. He's like, hey, we're not doing this. And I was like,
whoa. That's a big thing.
Yeah. And I had on and off issues with the leadership in my church, just because I was a young gun who thought he knew everything, of course.
Yeah. We're all that way at that age.
Yeah, and it was it was terrible. And so I remember telling him, like, okay, well, the first thing I'm doing is bouncing out of this church now, because we were kind of staying on at this church because they were gonna kind of support us. So I said, well, hey, the first thing I want to do is I want to bail out of this church. And I'd been there since my grandma had helped like start the church. Like,
oh wow,
yeah, I had been there for years and years and years and years. So I was ready to go. So I left, and kind of I remember when I announced that I was leaving, I had a couple bad conversations with the worship leader at the time. He was an older guy, in his late 50s, early 60s. And we just were not seeing eye to eye, just because, again, like he had an idea of what he wanted me to be. And I think that I was never going to be that. And I think that I had an idea of just like, I mean, to be totally truthful, I had this idea that like, well, hey, why don't you just retire and I'll take your job because I'm so good at it. And it was, oh my gosh, I feel so, Dave, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry.
Confessions, apologies happening.
And so I remember him telling me, it was kind of the first time anybody had kind of called me out on something, and he sat down with me, and he said, hey man, you've got some really serious character issues.
Ooh, wow, that's hard to hear.
You start hearing that character issue word, you're like, what do you mean?
What do you mean you don't know anything about me?
But I'm so good at music. And it was like, and I can sing so well. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, no. Like, you're a great musician. You're a great drummer, great singer, great guitar player. You've got some serious character defects, some character issues that are going to really, really hold you back. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, I am this humble worship leader who like, and it was just so bad. Yeah. And I just can't imagine him laughing. And so I bailed out, and I took that really, really offensively, talked up a bunch of the people, was like, can't believe he said this about me. Like, I'm a really good person. Like I've spent so much time leading worship at this church. I'm not getting paid, blah, 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 blah. And so he was, one of the things he said that really stuck with me is he said, you need to go to another, I think for you to really realize this is an issue, because you're so arrogant, you need to go to another church and have these same issues at another church. And then you'll hopefully realize, if I've had these issues with two other churches.
It's not the church.
Yeah. So I was 19, and I remember it was like my first, here's where the good stuff starts happening. I was a pretty good goody, whatever you want to call it, goody two shoe kind of Christian.
Yeah.
Growing up, my senior year, like I didn't do anything bad. You know, while I knew that everybody was out partying, I was like leading worship and playing music and.
It's pretty good.
And not, yeah. And, you know, kind of checking in the boxes. I went to church all the time. And I was like, if I wasn't at home, I was at church, you know, and was in Christian bands and stuff like that. And so I remember this, you know, 19-year-old punk kid. I was like, I remember walking to class and looking up at the sky and just turning to God and saying, you know what, God, like it's at this point, you know, I just kind of had it and you and I need a break. And I just can imagine him going, LOL, dude.
Yeah.
And so
I love that.
yeah. And so my idea of rebellion at 19 was like, yeah, I'm gonna start going to hookah bars.
Nice.
So I started going to hookah bars.
I love me a good. You know what? Here in Santee, hookah bars are very popular.
Really?
Yeah, people love hookah here in Santee, which
Yeah.
is I don't get it, but also I'm like you. I my whole life I've just kind of been like, you know, I just not into that stuff. Well, you at that age, you know, and so
yeah.
it's a big deal. But that was your idea of rebellion. That's interesting.
Yeah, which was so funny. It gets much worse over the years. But, you know, so 19 years old, you know, and then another thing that became really prevalent was like I would hang out with all different kinds of girls and make out and do, you know, stupid stuff and then just kind of bail out. And that's been a big, you know, my friend Marlena Copado. If you guys are looking for an awesome worship leader to check out Marlena Copado. She is fantastic. She leads worship at a church called Daybreak Church, and she's awesome.
I've seen Daybreak around here.
She's amazing. So she told me a couple of years back, she said, you know, I've noticed something about you. I think your Achilles heel is like alcohol and women. And I was like, nailed it. Like, and anyway, so that kind of, you know, but then again, Greg comes back to me and says, hey man, like I'm going to this church. Like I really would love to see you there. So I started going again and really kind of got kind of back on track, if you will.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon into that, found myself at a church called Lakeside Church in Folsom. Great, amazing church, full of amazing people there. So I started as their middle school worship leader, which was so funny. The story of me, the story goes, I had my interview or my tryout to lead the next day. Well, the night before, my buddy Josh and I got drunk for the first time. 19 years old, I'd probably only had like a sip of his dad's beer, like never drank before.
And that was the night you're going to just let the world have it.
Yeah. And that was like my big move, you know, I like our friend Allie got some alcohol and we got, it was like, you know, like if you guys who are listening at home, like it was warm Coke and warm rum.
Oh, geez.
And it was so, to this day, I can't drink rum. And it was so gross. And I got so sick afterwards, obviously.
Oh, no.
My body was like, oh, what is this?
Yeah.
And spent literally, I called my buddy Jeff, who was trying to get me the job. And I was like, yo, dude, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. And he's like, okay, well, keep me in the loop. And then around 2 o'clock, I finally called him. We were supposed to be there at like 4:30, and I was like, okay, I think I can do it.
Yeah.
And so we get up there at lead worship. It goes well. I hope people are catching a common theme here. Like I had my private life, you know, I had this private, like where I was like, okay, well, I'm going to kind of do things that I know are wrong and are not like what I know God would want me to do. And then I'll have my ministry life and I'll have my like life that I have here.
It's exhausting.
Dude. We just getting started. And so we get to the church. It goes well. Long story short, they offer me the position and I take it. So I spend 2 years at this church. And in the first year, I would say I was doing really well. Yeah. And then second year was when I started to do the kind of like, okay, well, you know, I was, you know, like it's a common thing. Like girls kind of like the musician worship leader type.
Totally.
Yeah. And
you're joking.
So I was hanging out with all types of different women. You know, I'd lead worship on the weekend, and you know, then during the week I would I was moved, at around 18, 19 years old, I moved out with some roommates for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I had all this freedom. And so we had girls over all the time. So I'd be like leading worship on the weekend, hooking up with girls during the week. And it wasn't, and I'm not saying that it was like I was, swimming in it, but like,
Yeah.
it was, and at that point for me, hooking up, quote unquote, was like making out and like, doing stupid stuff that we're not supposed to, but I wasn't having sex with anyone.
Oh, well, that's
And-
good to clarify, because I thought this whole time you were having sex with all
Yeah,
the
no. I wasn't having, yeah, I should clarify
people. I
that.
was like, wow.
So that, you can only do about a year of that. So halfway through that year, had kind of a come to Jesus moment with some of the pastors, and my boss, Carl Rettinger, who is awesome. I love that guy. He sits down with me. He's like, "Hey man, I just want to let you know, like, I actually submitted paperwork to fire you today."
Whoa.
Yeah, and I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah, man. Like, we've been talking to you over and over again. Like, you're not yourself. Like, what's going on?" And he was like, "Well, so I've talked about a couple different figures that I wanted to be.
Yeah, first one was
Greg, and the second one is a guy by the name of Gabriel Wilson, who was our worship leader for the time at Lakeside. Awesome dude. He's kind of gone on to write a bunch of really great worship songs, like co-write.
Wow.
And he was just this like really charismatic, like rock and roll. He was like, he toured many, many years with a band called the Rock and Roll Worship Circus. Like, and so he's very polarizing. And so I was trying to have his kind of influence as a worship leader while also living this other life on the side, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
So Carl kind of says to me like, "Hey, like, I tried to fire you today, but Gabriel actually saved your butt." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So
Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So I lasted about another 6 months until one of our pastors on staff kind of sat down with me and just kind of like ripped me apart in a good way. Like, he needed to be doing that. He was like, "I actually think you need to like get off the worship team for a while." And, cause it was a really big church. It was kind of my first big church experience.
Yeah.
And cause I'd been at this small church for 20 years
Mm-hmm.
and it was really cool. But I was really like, there's kind of it's kind of a culture, and I feel like it's kind of not happening as much anymore. But back then it was like, we thought we were like the shit. Like, we were like, like, you know what? Like, I don't want to talk to anybody afterwards. Like, all I want to do is hang out with my clique. I don't want to, talk to people afterwards.
That's the thing that happens in ministry all the time is,
oh my gosh,
you just kind of create this family clique and
Yeah.
nobody can come in between it. And it's all in good intention, right? You just want to make a family,
Yes.
and then, but that can cause some kind of further issue if you're not letting people in or you're not reaching people as a Christian.
We were super exclusive. It was just not a good environment going on.
Yeah.
So 6 more months of that, and then I sit down and Gabriel says to me, "Hey man, so we have a meeting with some of the pastors today, and I just want to let you know, like, before we go in there, like, your time is up. Like,
Wow.
I couldn't save you this time." So we go in there, and I'm fired from this church, which was a huge bummer, but I totally kind of saw it coming. Like, basically that pastor had like called me out, and I didn't take it well. Ended up talking some smack to two other pastors who were like, "Okay, we need to get rid of this."
Yeah.
This
What's
is
the
bad.
feeling like just being like, I've never been fired only because I've only had one job and I'm young-ish.
Yeah.
And so, but like the feeling of being fired, like after that meeting, obviously it sounded like it didn't go well.
Yeah.
What were the thoughts after that post-firing meeting?
I think that there was like part of me was like, I kind of deserve this, but at the same time I was also kind of like, well, you know what? Like, I've been doing good work here, blah 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 blah. But and then I kind of decided to like live into after that I kind of decided I had just turned 21. So I fully decided to start living into the like, okay, well, I started going out with friends, getting super drunk all the time.
Just now it's legal.
Yeah,
so,
and
I mean,
I'm legal to
geez.
do it, and like, so, but I was still kind of like volunteering at this church. They were like, "Hey, like, we still want to see you around." Like,
That can be hard to hear after you've been fired.
yeah, It was, but I think what was really cool about that church is, they didn't like separate from me and then want to keep a distance from me. They were like, hey, we're letting you go, but we want you to stay here. And I was blown. I haven't been at a church like that since, where they were like, hey, we're come as you are, like, and like, even though we're letting you go, we want to hold on to you. Like, we know that you have a gift and we want to see you through this. And I remember a really good friend of mine that I'm still friends with to this day. His name's Sean Miller, and he's one of the pastors there. And he, like, very soon after I was fired, was like, hey man, like, we don't want to see you leave. Like, we want to see you stick around. He's actually the guy who fired me.
Oh, wow.
Because he was over all the youth staff.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't want to see you go. Like, I want to see you hanging out. So obviously I was sidelined on the worship team for a while. And in the time that, you know, between I was fired, Gabriel ended up leaving, and then we were without a worship leader for a while. So I kind of started volunteering. I wasn't leading worship, but I was playing every once in a while.
Yeah.
And after that, like, I remember coming back. It was like December. I'd been fired, I think, in June. And then in December, Sean called me up late at night one night. And he's like, hey, do you want to come over and, like, hang out? And I was like, okay. So I went over there, and he was like, hey, I just think it's really cool that you stuck around. And I was like, honestly, Sean, that fell on you guys. Like, I was fully planning on leaving when you fired me.
Yeah.
But when you told me to stick around, like, I thought that was super cool. You know,
That differs from the first church you were at, because the first church didn't reach out to you like in that way, and you were like, I'm just kind of done. I want out.
Yeah. I gave them kind of a pass, honestly, because I'd been there for 20 years, been there for super long. But yeah, totally. It's the only church that I've ever separated from where they were like, hey, we want to, like,
yeah,
you know,
still
like, where
we love
several of
you.
the staff, like, reached out like that. And up to that point, I mean. And so I'm like 22. I had been working at Trader Joe's.
You are the perfect millennial in this moment.
Yeah, I am. So 22, working at Trader Joe's. Unfortunately, again, like I said, drinking has kind of been a theme for me here.
Yeah.
I ended up going on a lunch break with a buddy of mine, and we both have a beer. And what do you do when you're 22 years old and you don't have a brain? You post that you're drinking on your lunch break on Instagram.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what I did. And it was like, having a beer on my lunch break. And I get a text from one of my buddies who's working too, and he's like, you need to take that picture down, like, right now.
Yeah.
So I show back up to work, and they're like, dude, you're fired. Like, did you seriously drink on your lunch break? And I was like, yeah. And the guy that was with me was like, hey, so nobody knows that I drank, so he I think he's still at Trader Joe's, which is a punishment in itself, I guess, if you think about it.
No kidding.
And so there I was fired from the church, fired from this job, and I was like, well, I guess my dad had been kind of talking to me about the Navy for like a number of years, so I finally decided to join the Navy. So I joined the Navy. And I spent 4 years doing that, and right when I got into the military, I was dating a girl, and it was probably the first time I'd ever been in a real kind of adult relationship.
Yeah.
Monogamy is just not something I've ever been great at. And so we are dating, and we'd been together about 9 months, and that's about as long as it takes for a girl to realize that at that point that I had some serious character issues, and we were already doing long distance and fighting like all the time. And she called me up and she was like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to be dating you anymore. So here I am. I'm in a new city.
No.
You know, I had just moved to San Diego. It was like August of 2012. And I was like, we broke up, I think, in November. Yeah, November of 2012. And I was like, shit, I've lost everything. Like,
it feels like the world's ending.
Yeah, it felt like and I'd never been through a breakup before, so I didn't even know how to be that way, and it was just
so hard. This is so the worst.
That was the worst. So I remember after we broke up, like towards the beginning of 2013, I remember being like, well, that's it, God. Like, you and I, like, remember when we were done before? Like, now we're really done.
We've had our run.
We've had
this
a great
is the
run.
end of the road here.
And so then I fully decided to, like, live into, basically spent 4 years just, like, totally drunk off my ass, like, but I, again, still in and out of churches.
Yeah.
I found my way into so many different worship leading positions over the 4 years that I was in the military, and like kind of like halfway through my last year, something clicked with me, and I was like, like I should really start actually pursuing Jesus.
Yeah.
Like maybe I should figure this out, and like halfway through, I ended up finding my way. My friend Marlena, who I'd referenced earlier,
Yeah.
we ended up getting in contact, and she was like, hey, we need a youth worship leader. And so I found myself working at this church in Carlsbad, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I got out of the military. There's a whole big story that goes into it, but it was a really crazy God moment. Like, I was able to get out of the military like 4 months early so I could take this job, and did that for about a year and a half. And that's kind of like, and in the year and a half, like 6 months into it, I was like really doing well. I had like been living with Michael and Kat, and if you guys know Michael and Kat, they're awesome.
Awesome people.
They were really good at like calling out like, hey, we think you should start going to therapy. Like, so I was doing really well.
Yeah.
Well, 6 months into it, I kind of met this girl who was a really great girl, but we were both not doing well at the time. We got together, and just everything that I had decided to stop doing started doing again. So it was basically the same thing that had been going on at
It's like a
Lakeside.
relapse almost.
Oh, absolutely. And it totally wasn't her fault. If she had known where I was at, she probably never would have had anything to do with me. But
Yeah.
so there I am, and this time it's worse, because I'm showing up to work, like everyone's like, why are you so out of energy? Like, well, it's because I was partying all night last night.
Yeah.
And
It's called a hangover.
oh gosh, it was horrible. Like, and more than any other time in my life, because these guys were sharp guys. Like,
Yeah.
they're like, some of them have written books, like.
They're sharper than anybody I've known then.
Yeah, and so they were like, hey man, like, what's going on? Like, and so there we are, like, I'm like, shoot, like 8 months in, like, I'm gonna lose this freaking church position.
Because that's been the track record so
Yeah.
far, is you kind of get sat down and
Yeah.
with all the pastors, and then
Yeah.
they give you some chat, and you're like, oh, I've seen this before.
Yeah, so basically, again, the same thing, like, so a year and a half in, right? So it's about a year ago now, and it was like July. We played this concert. Our worship leader, Mar, brought like 250 people to House of Blues. Showed
Wow.
up from Carlsbad
Dang.
to come see her play. That's how loved she is. And
Of course.
I ended up getting super hammered with a bunch of the guys there, and ended up having to get like taken home like by some friends.
Wow.
And it comes out, like, people start to find out about it, and long story short, that next week I'm sitting down with our young adults pastor, and he's like, I know everything that happened this weekend. Like, really, and was like, kind of like, it wasn't like a, hey buddy, what's going on? It was like I know everything, and you need to get your affairs in order.
Yeah.
And basically what we had decided was like, you can either, he's like, I'll give you the first shot, like, to go to our, exec pastor and talk to him what happened. So I went home, sat down with my crew, and was like, hey, look, like, I think this is pretty clear. Like, I need to resign. So
Yeah.
I resign. So I show up and I resign, and then really decided it was time to start doing some soul searching. I realized, like, okay, I've spent,
This is strike 4,
yeah.
right?
Well, it's really it's really strike 3.
Strike 3. Okay.
Strike 3 at this point. And so I realized, and it was really cool. So I'm sitting across from our exec pastor, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this is at least I'm not getting fired.
Yeah.
I'm resigning. And, what's really cool is I remember him saying to me, like, I really still think that ministry is your thing. I know you're probably thinking this is it, but
Yeah.
I really do believe that ministry is still your thing. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, whatever. So very fortunately I had the GI Bill to fall back on. So I made some, before I resigned, I like made sure I could go to school. And so then I was going to school, and I remember calling, our worship leader at Journey at the time was Jason Dennison. And I called him and I was like, hey, listen, man, like, I'm resigning from Daybreak and I need to come, like, I need to come sit under you and some guys for a while. And he's like, cool, well, I'm only going to be around for the next 4 months and then I'm planting my own church. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
oh, crap. And then, so there I am. I'm like, and it was what was so cool. I just felt like such a wounded puppy.
Yeah.
And not like Daybreak had wounded me. They were so respectful.
Yeah.
Like, so earlier when I had said up until that point, you know, I hadn't experienced the whole like letting go of someone and then them wanting to reach out to you. I had so many people reach out to me because like after I resigned from Daybreak, I went straight home to Sacramento to spend some time kind of reflecting over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
You know, and I had so many people reaching out to me, like so many of their men's ministry, so many of my youth, of the people that I'd been mentoring, you know, which was really, really cool. You know, I would love to say that it was really well handled on both sides. I'd say that they made mistakes, I made mistakes, but really it was the best thing for both parties for me to take off. And so after that, what was really cool was Journey like right away was like, yo, like let's have you start playing this weekend, which I was like, are you sure? And they were like, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Which was really cool. Like, but then again, Journey's always been that like come as you are.
Yeah.
Like, so ended up sitting with Jason for a while, and then midway through that, so like midway through fall of last year, was that fall? Fall comes before winter, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
You made me think. I don't know. Yeah,
I know,
it is.
right?
It is fall before winter.
Yeah. So midway through fall, we get a new worship leader, and his name is Trevor Davis, and he's awesome. Such a rad guy. But I had this kind of stigma from other, like, I was like, oh, you know what? I've worked with, you know, kind of low key famous people in the past, and I don't know how this is going to be. So I had already kind of made plans to bail out of Journey. And
Wow.
Michael, who was really close with Trevor, was like, hey, just give it a chance. End up just like meeting Trevor, and Trevor is just, if you've met Trevor, he's just such a guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's just, you know, like one of the best pastors. He's actually, honestly, like, I've worked with so many different worship leaders, and his official title is worship director, but without a doubt, he is the best pastor of people that I've ever dealt with. He's just really, really good at like, he goes around, we'll have these practices, right? And he'll go around and talk to every person at and you watch it happen. It's so beautiful. All that to say, you know, and over the last year, I would say it's probably been the most I've ever really done on working on myself. And I think what I was really needing to learn was, who am I? Like, who is Sam? You know, who is Sam trying to be, you know? And so I really had to look at so many different things in my life, right?
Yeah.
You know, and there's such thing as self-evaluation. And I think I had never done that before. I was just always kind of living out of this, like, well, you know, I'm just going to kind of live off the seat of my pants. And really about a year and a half ago, after that whole thing went down, I decided, like, you know, I really need to start like thinking more about how my actions are going to affect not only myself, but how are my actions going to affect other people?
Yeah.
You know, because everybody who went through that with me, like this whole, like me resigning from that church, and, you know, it was kind of a bitch to watch, you know, because here I was like really, really like throwing away such an incredible opportunity. And, you know, like it was really hard for my close friends to watch, like, you know, and like I've amassed this great group of guys like Tyler, Noah, and Michael, who just were like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, and I remember being in Vegas. We were in Vegas, like, we were all kind of going through stuff, so it was like not fun. And I remember like kind of sitting up and having this realization, and they looked at me, and I was like, yeah, I don't like myself. And they were like, they all kind of looked at each other like, yeah, he said it, he did it.
Those are your words.
Yeah, we're not saying it. And it was just like, so I, you know, after I had resigned, I like went back to therapy. So I go to a therapist out of I don't know if I can say her name.
What I have a question on that.
Okay.
What was it like? Was it hard for you to say yes to therapy, or because like I think sometimes as a culture, like guys were like,
Yeah.
we don't need therapy, like we'll fix it ourselves.
Oh,
and
totally.
was there that moment of like, or have you always been kind of susceptible for therapy?
Oh, not at all. So, I I think I had known Kat. If you guys know Kat, like she can kind of peg who you are like right away. And she said, so the first time I met that crew, and I want to shout them out, like they're just awesome people, like they're just like my crew, you know, like my fam, like Kat, Michael, Tyler, Amelia, Leanne, Daryl, Noah, Christina. I every time I do this, I forget someone, and if I don't mention someone,
Is Daniel Collins in that or no?
Daniel is in that. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Daniel's kind of newer, like to the.
Well, I know that
'cause
he's new. I just didn't know if
there's
he was
like
a part of the.
Yeah, there's like separate like. Oh, and Minaret. If I had not said Minaret, she
Ooh.
kicked me in the nuts. I think I got everybody, and I remember hanging out with them all for the first time, and it was at our friend Victor's house, and I got like pretty drunk. It was a Bible study. We were at a Bible study. This was this was like pre daybreak, and
Okay.
I got super hammered, and I remember Kat saying to me, "Yeah, I looked at you and I said, that's something's up there," and I was like, "Oh, if you only you knew."
Yeah.
So they started pretty quickly. I had known them probably about 2 or 3 months before they started saying, "Hey, what do you think about therapy?" And I was like, "Well, my dad would tell you, you know." And growing up, I have one brother. So I have one brother, and I have my dad and my mom. And we were kind of a family that was like we shouted and screamed at each other.
Yeah.
And then it was like we didn't talk about it.
Yeah, you just got your feelings out there,
Yeah,
and it was
just-
over with.
Just all, you know, like we'd scream at each other and yell, and then we didn't talk about it. And that was it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't really like to talk about my feelings. And nowadays I love talking about my feelings. I'll talk about my feelings all day.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, and as recently as 2 years ago, I was like, yeah, you know, I really don't know about that. I don't, you know, therapy is, you know, I don't believe in it. So I finally started going. You know, after this whole thing went down, after this last relationship that I'd been in, I decided maybe I should. So I started seeing a therapist, and he was really awesome. But you know, pretty soon we'd probably been seeing each other about 6 months, and he said to me, "I think you should try EMDR therapy, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing." And he was like, "I don't know how to do it though." So I stopped going to him, and then I didn't go for a while. And then after I resigned from Daybreak, I decided, you know, maybe I should really, think about like actually going to see a therapist, you know. And so I went and like found one who could do EMDR and really started processing some stuff like from my early childhood.
Yeah.
Which, you know, so I think really for me, like looking at it in the perspective of like there were things. So, you know, like I was talking earlier about the alcohol, like, and a lot of my friends were like, we need to start looking like maybe you're an alcoholic. You know, so but I would stop drinking and the problems would still be there. So really the drinking and the women and the stuff, they were all kind of this manifestation of this really, really deep, dark stuff that I hadn't dealt with.
Yeah.
You know? And, I mean, we don't need to go into what it was, but it was just, you know, like, I mean, you grow up with a family where you don't talk about stuff and you're going to have some issues.
And then, yeah, that feeling of, you know, just kind of yelling it out to like transitioning into like, this is how I properly communicate my issues, you know,
Yeah.
It's hard when you don't know what you just grew up not doing that.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
kind of, but it sounds like therapy kind of like forced you into like this, okay, this is how I properly process things.
Yeah. And I think what's been really cool about it is I've really, you know, so I think as a result of therapy and a result of a couple other things, about 2 or 3 months ago, I had like probably my first ever mental breakdown where I had like a series of like 5 hours of panic attacks that were just awful.
Yeah.
And so that was and ever since then I've dealt with major anxiety and kind of depression. I don't know what you would, but it's the first time I've ever really dealt with like mental health issues.
Yeah.
And what's been really cool about that is, like, I guess if there's like two things I want to impart from my story, it's don't live double lives. They don't work.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because
Yeah.
I'm curious about, I think at some point I probably lived that way as far as
Oh,
like
yeah.
you kind of like in the public eye, you're like this perfect person that you want to, you go to church and you're like this beacon of hope for people and like, hey, you can come to church anytime. And then there's like this other side of you that maybe some people see that are like, they're like, you look at it and you're like, I can't even tell you're a Christian,
Oh, totally.
And it's
And
like that's just two lives. And what was the realization point for you that you're like, I can't live two lives? Was there a
yeah,
moment?
it was for sure at daybreak, and a lot for me was looking at the way that the pastors there lived their lives, because I would spend time with them outside of church and see how incredibly Christ-like they led their lives. Guys like Matt and Chase and Shay and guys who just have these incredible families. Jason and all the different pastors there, like
Yeah.
they just live it. They're not just like, yeah, they weren't doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was just incredible to see it. And I was like, man, why is the ministry that they're doing so like well, or like why is it like
Thriving.
it's just so thriving? And I think what's really really tempting, and especially in the social media generation, our generation,
Yeah.
and I see it honestly, I see it most prevalently in worship communities where we have that like, and I think a lot of it, my whole thing with drinking came from, I want to spend time with people who aren't Christians.
Yeah.
I want to, I don't want to just be this churchy church dude that's like, yeah, man, I just pray all the time and it's like, and I'm fine.
Yeah,
And like,
I
I
went to-
just, like when I'm, like I had someone tell me like a couple months ago when I was feeling super anxious, like, man, just don't be anxious. And I was like, I want to punch you in your face. Like,
How does that even? Yeah,
like
just don't do it.
Oh, you're right, totally. You
Yeah.
know, so I want to live it's so hard, because I want to find that happy medium of like I want to, like, one of my favorite things to do, and I've done this with Amber, who was on the show earlier this year. Like, one of our favorite things to do is go and quote unquote do ministry, and it's not even doing ministry. It's just we go to, like, one of my favorite things to do is go to dive bars after worship team practices and hang out with the people there.
Yeah.
I think that but that's where that you have to find that medium, because that was where that all kind of came from.
Being influenced by the people you're trying to influence.
Exactly. So you have to kind of, again, you have to find that medium. And I think for me, it comes from, in this period of time of my life, I've surrounded myself with people who really, really love Jesus. So I can go out and maybe hang out with people who aren't Christians or who don't want to follow God, and like still maintain good and healthy relationships with them.
Yeah, and along the same lines, and you can tell me if I'm off or on this, but I think a lot of it too is you kind of have to know who you are. And at the time in this all kind of happening, you say you didn't really you were kind of searching and soul searching and all that, and you weren't really finding that core. And so if you're going to go into a community that one has no characteristics of what you want to be, Christ-like characteristics, and you're going to try and influence them, you better know who you are. Right?
Oh, totally. And I would say that's been the most important thing that I've done over this last year, is kind of like figure out who I am and who that person is, and there's still things I'm figuring out. Like, a big thing that, like, and I don't think that enough people talk about this, a big thing that I struggled with in this last 2 months of mental health has been doubts about God. And
Interesting.
we have these, like, nobody wants to talk about that. It's like, oh no, like, we can't talk about doubting God. And it's like, and no, like, I remember when I, like, it was like the weirdest thing. Like, I was like sitting in my house, and I just, like, after this whole thing had happened, and I was really like going at it with God, and that whole like Genesis 1 thing where it's like, you know, and then God, you know, in the beginning was God. And that like question like really threw me for a loop. It was like, okay, well, what do you, and it was totally the enemy too. He was like, well, what does that mean in the beginning was God?
Yeah.
And it literally, I remember like just being so anxious for like the next 3 days. Like, well, yeah, what does that mean? Well, what do you mean he just was? What do you mean God? Like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like that God just was, you know? And like, I remember then like watching this video where the guy, and it was really, really cool, you know? And it was like, when we talk about science, right? And we talk about like something can't come from absolutely nothing, right?
Yeah.
You know, like I started to think about it and it was like, well, shoot, okay, well, let's just say I decide, well, there is no God. I don't believe in God anymore. I'm just gonna say forget this whole thing and just live life. And I'm just gonna assume that we're all here on accident. Well, if you really think about it, that doesn't make any sense. Like when you really, really start to think, like really, really think about, okay, well, we just happened. We just,
Yeah.
okay, so like and when people talk about the Big Bang, and I totally believe that there's a chance that God created the world with the Big Bang. But
Yeah.
but when you take the intelligent design out of it, right? You take the like, okay, well, there's no creator. It just, okay, well, then what do you mean it just happened? Like, oh, well, these two things. Okay, well, stop right there. Where'd those two things come from? Where did those two things that collided that created the? So for me,
You're right.
I really started to live into that. Like, you know, like there's that super, and I hate to use this cliche because it's so churchy, but it's like, you know, honestly, it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. And that's true.
It is so true.
You know, and it blew my mind. It like actually like literally was such a mind expletive.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was like, you know, and the phrase that I've kind of got from like dealing with this, you know, because like I would say I would rather deal with like physical pain all day before
Yeah.
I ever had to deal with mental health. That sucks.
Yeah.
You know, but it was this crazy thing where like when I started thinking about these doubts, it actually brought me closer to God. And like he always does, we were playing at Journey one weekend, and Ed, who is our pastor, was talking about doubt are things that actually bring us closer to God, because it leaves us room. It leaves it when you start doubting God, it gives him room to say, okay, well, let me show you. And it was so cool because like as I was struggling with this mental health thing, the only thing that I feel like makes it better is when I like read scripture or if I pray. And it's really wild the way it works out, you know. And I get that not everybody believes, you know, this whole thing, but that's fine. You know, but it's just God, the phrase that, and we're trying to, a couple of the guys in my cohort, we're trying to write a song around this, like the idea that God, you proved yourself even when you didn't have to, which is so, I don't know, so wild. So I would say if there's two things I can impart, you know, where it's like, I think, you know, the double life thing, it just does not work.
Yeah.
And it's almost that thing where like God talks, where in scripture it talks about like the way if you're lukewarm, God's going to spit you out of his mouth. You can't have one or the other, right? You know, it just doesn't, for me, it just doesn't work. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm perfect.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, and I had this year of self-discovery and I'm perfect now. And I don't ever well, I really don't ever drink. I hardly ever drink anymore. But I'm not going to sit here and say that
You've made it out the other side.
Yeah, that I've made it out the other side. Like I'm still working on it, you know. And I think that another thing that I want to impart is like, you know, my friend Roy was talking to me about this the other day, and it was like, well, it's this idea that, you know, and something that like I would like to, and if anybody's listening on this and has the same thoughts and wants to connect and work out how to do this, like, let's chat.
Yeah.
I want to work out a group or a space for pastors, because I guarantee you, I'm not the only worship leader who has dealt with the whole like, well, I'm leading worship, but I also have this other life, but I can't be honest with the people at my church or else I'll get fired. You know,
Yeah.
because that's a legitimate concern.
A pastor's anonymous.
Yeah, where is it? You know, and so what I want to start, what I'd love to get going, and something that I'm working on, is creating a safe space for, you know, worship leaders, pastors, directors to get together and say like, hey, like, here are addictions that I have that I am trying to conquer, and I need help with that. You know,
Yeah.
I think that would be a really
I think
cool
that's
thing.
interesting too, because you know you think about pastors and worship pastors; they're just held to such a high standard,
Yeah.
because they're supposed to be like the shepherds of our church.
Yeah.
And so, when somebody like that fails, you know, you see it all the time with priests. You know, there's always stuff in the news like people like whenever you fail or something like that, you're just kind of people see you differently. You know, and it's like there's just such a stigma around like. You have to kind of be on your best behavior, air quotes, when you're a pastor.
Yeah.
And I think that's an awesome idea. I think there should be some sort of Pastors Anonymous or somewhere a meeting where you guys can kind of just share because in a space where you know other leaders will get it. Because that's the problem is only a leader will understand when another leader's having issues. You know, you're like, I get it. We're all human. But if you're not a leader, you're like, well, he shouldn't be leading as immediately as your thought, you know?
Yeah. And to me, it's like, it's ludicrous. The idea of like, you know, and maybe it's just, you know, not everybody is cut from the same cloth, right? You know, like not everybody can be the like where, oh, you know what, I'm gonna be a Christian and everything's gonna be perfect. You know, like obviously we're supposed to live as close to Jesus as we can.
Yeah.
Well, the bottom line is not everybody's going to be able to do that all the time. And what I would love to see is kind of that like space for grace. You know, I will say that each church that I've been at was so, and was and still was so graceful to me.
Yeah.
You know, both of the churches that I, was fired or resigned from, like, they gave me so many chances. And that's what I loved about them. And each one of those churches was like, we want to help you.
Yeah.
Like
how do we do it?
You know, so what I would love is a safer space for, cause no matter what, there's just things that you're going to do, you know, like that you're going to not feel safe sharing that with someone who's also on your team.
Yeah.
It's just not like let's say, like what happens if you're, a worship leader somewhere and one night, like, you have in the past struggled with alcoholism, and one night you relapse and you get super drunk and things happen. Like, I don't think that we should fire that person. I think that we should say to that person, here's a space for you to go and be and talk about these things, and, and because we just, again, like I love that both of those churches that I've been a part of, and I have great relationships with most of those people still to this day.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the guys that the church, that Anthem Church that I led worship with this weekend, was a guy that was over me at Daybreak.
Wow.
And like, big shout out to, again, both Lakeside Church and Daybreak Church. I just felt like we're places where they really, rather than seeing me as, a person who leads worship and they're a commodity, they were really good about being, hey, no, like, we see you as Sam the person. Like, I love that you're a worship leader, but we also know you have these issues. And, like, I remember sitting at, like, one of my first kind of slip-ups at Daybreak, and I remember our exec guy sitting across from me, and he was like, what do you mean you think I'm going to fire you? And I was like, I'm not fired for this. And he's like, no, dude, like, if I expected you to be a perfect person, like, I certainly wouldn't have hired you.
Yeah.
And so I love that. So, and I'm not going to say, but I think that every church should be like that.
Yeah.
I think that every church should be like, hey, like, we want to give you, and I would say that I wouldn't be doing, as well as I am if it hadn't been for those churches, And so I would love to see more churches be like a little more graceful on their leaders,
Yeah. No, I think that sometimes that's, you expect a lot out of somebody, especially in a paid position in the
Yeah.
church, and can be kind of intense. But I think your idea about creating a safe space for pastors is a great idea because I was just talking to my lead pastor over at Riverview, Todd Tolson, the other day, and he said, hopefully he doesn't mind me quoting him. I don't think he will, but he said, when he speaks, when he gives the message at church, he says, I go to church, but I don't actually like go to church. He's like,
Yeah.
he's like, I'm there for God to use me. He's like, so I have to find creative other elements and other ways that I can be fed and that I can, deal with the things that I'm going through without, because when I'm at church, I'm supposed to be this leader, I'm supposed to be this shepherd, and kind of finding a space for everybody like that. I can imagine it would be very, very helpful. I'm not in a pastor position, but I am in leadership and ministry, so I can understand that, and I feel that for that. The one question I did have for you in ministry, as far as when you're in ministry, was if there were times that you felt like you were getting really burnt out, is there a way that you can recharge yourself? And I know that doesn't really pertain to your story, but it pertains to
No, that's
ministry. And what is that for you?
That's actually a really good question. I know that one of the reasons that there were a bunch of different reasons that I was quote unquote acting out at the last church I was at. And I would say some of that was because I was burnt out. But I will say that I think burnout occurs for many different reasons, but I'm going to share how it occurred for me.
Yeah.
Because I was living that double life, leading worship to me was not leading worship. It was, hey, I have a job to do, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't leading worship. I was showing up and singing songs, and I was very fortunate that I had a good team around and that God still worked like in these different situations in which I was kind of phoning it in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking that like there's got to be something, like why am I feeling so burnt out, and I will tell you that I'm just coming off kind of like a 5 or 6, like there's a couple of us on our team at Journey, and it's like my buddy Dave, who is the music director and our keyboard player. We play, Dave plays literally every weekend, and then Spencer and I play about 3 or 4 times a month, because there's only me and Dave who are the guitar players, and then we have another guy, but he's kind of on a sabbatical right now. And then we have Spencer. We only have 2 other keyboard players.
Yeah.
And so me and David and Spencer find ourselves playing a lot.
Yeah.
But I've never gotten burned out from it. I would say this is a little like when I was at that last church, I got burnt out and I was leading a lot, but here I'm leading again. I'm playing drums, guitar, whatever, again, like almost 4 times a month. And there's no burnout. And I will tell you that it is because there's a different heart there. Like I'm not showing up like just to play drums. I'm showing up because I'm interested in leading people in worship.
Yeah.
And I think that burnout occurs. And again, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but for me, burnout occurs most often when I'm attempting to pour out of a cup that is totally like not there.
Yeah.
And I think so. To answer your question, what do I do to fill that cup? Is a lot of times I'll go to other churches, and kind of like where I don't have to play. Obviously spending time with God is the most important thing.
Yeah.
For me, what has been a big difference in this season of my life, Brian Johnson, who is the worship leader at Bethel Church, talks about this, where one of the things that he ended up having a very similar kind of breakdown. And one of the things that he says is like, I almost worry about getting healed from this breakdown because it's like, will I rely on God the same way again? And one of the things that's been really amazing in this last 2.5 months, after I had this mental breakdown, was this need for God. Like I physically cannot go a couple days without reading his word or seeking him. Like it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like it's like sitting here in this chair, like I'm like thinking about it now and thinking about how, like, literally scripture and time with God has become like water for my soul, like almost like it's supposed to be that way, you know. And
Yeah.
and you know, I wish that it hadn't had to be that way. This 10 years of, you know, kind of the, you know, if there's any story in the Bible that I relate to, it's obviously the prodigal son.
Yeah.
But it could be called the continual prodigal son, because it's just happened so many times. And I really feel like for the first time, you know, I would encourage any worship leader, pastor, person who's going through that, where you're feeling burnt out, like, and you really feel like, oh, but I can't resign. Maybe sometimes you need that. Maybe, like, don't be afraid of that call to, like, because for me, it had to happen.
Yeah.
I need what was absolutely needing to happen for me was I needed to take some time and really, really, you know, choose God for God, and not like choose him like, oh crap, like my job really depends on this. I really need to be seeking God, like,
Yeah.
because that still didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, and I've found that being out of ministry and being just a quote unquote normal folk person, I have gotten closer with God than I ever would. And I say that the next thing that I do in ministry, it will no doubt be the best thing I ever do, because I will, for the first time, be doing it on all cylinders. And I am, again, thankful for the churches that I had the opportunity to, but like, I'm stoked for whatever I do next, because it's just going to be like out of this thankful heart of like, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
I know what it's like to not do this for the right reasons.
Yeah.
You know, I know,
Yeah.
and I know the quality of ministry that I can do when I'm on all cylinders, you know?
Yeah. Dude, it's an amazing story, man. I mean, like, and at the end of these, usually we ask kind of the question of the advice you would give. But you just basically beautifully said that. I mean,
Yeah.
I love that you're like answering the questions before I even get to ask them. That's my favorite. And so I mean, your story is incredible. I just have to start by saying that. And thank you for coming on, because it's just like, I guess I didn't expect anything because I didn't know anything about your story.
Yeah.
But now that I've heard it, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of impact to it. And I think everybody's story has impact, but you know, you especially bring some really good value and importance to everything. And so anybody that wants to connect with you can find you at. We just talked about your Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a Twitter, an Instagram, and a Facebook.
Okay.
My Facebook is just my name, Samuel White.
Good luck finding you. But
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, dude, for real. My Instagram is Samuel Donovan White, so SamuelDonovanWhite. And then my Twitter, I don't actually know what my Twitter handle is.
Well, if we find it, I'll put it in the description. But yeah, again, thank you for coming, Sam.
Yeah,
And
of course.
I just genuinely appreciate it. I think your story is exactly the kind of story that we love hearing here at the Mirror Effect. And if you're listening, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on the Mirror Effect. Music starts.